German soldiers stationed along the Atlantic Wall developed a strange habit during 1942. They refused to stand guard alone. Officers who ordered single-man watch duties found themselves facing near mutiny from hardened veterans who had survived the Eastern Front. Without complaint, these weren't cowards. Something was hunting them in the darkness, and whatever it was left almost no evidence behind, just missing sentries, tiny puncture wounds, and the growing certainty that death could arrive without a sound. The weapon responsible measured less than 12 inches. It weighed barely half a pound, and it was being mass-produced in British sword factories by the hundreds of thousands. This is the story of how two aging policemen from the deadliest city on the planet designed a blade so perfectly suited for assassination that it rewrote the rules of special operations warfare forever. Before we understand the weapon, we need to understand what forged its creators. Picture Shanghai during the 1920s, not the romanticized version from old Hollywood films, but the actual grinding nightmare that existed between the wars. Colonial powers had carved out small territories of European law surrounded by territories where no law existed at all. Criminal syndicates operated openly. The Green Gang alone pulled in the equivalent of tens of millions in modern currency every month through narcotics trafficking. Bodies appeared in the Huangpu River so frequently that police stopped investigating unless someone important complained. Into this environment stepped William Fairbairn, a young British constable on his very first patrol in 1907. He never completed it. Gang members ambushed him in an alley and drove their blades into his body repeatedly. Medical reports would later document the scars covering his torso, arms, and even his palms from defensive wounds. By all reasonable expectation, he should have died in that gutter. He didn't, and during his hospital recovery, something fundamental shifted in his thinking. While healing, he noticed a sign advertising jiu-jitsu instruction and immediately began training. This wasn't casual interest. This was obsession, born from nearly bleeding out on foreign cobblestones. Over the following 3 decades, Fairbairn accumulated combat knowledge like a scholar collects books. He became the first Western practitioner to achieve second-degree black belt status at the Kodokan in Tokyo. He studied Chinese martial traditions, Western boxing, French kickboxing, and wrestling from multiple traditions. But theory meant nothing to him without practical application. Police records document his involvement in hundreds upon hundreds of violent confrontations throughout his career. Some historians estimate the number exceeded 600 separate incidents. His eventual partner arrived through different circumstances. Eric Sykes came to Shanghai as a firearms representative for major American manufacturers. An expert marksman and former hunter of dangerous game, Sykes possessed skills that complemented Fairbairn's hand-to-hand expertise perfectly. When Sykes joined the Shanghai police as a volunteer officer in 1926, the partnership that would reshape military close combat doctrine was born. Together, these two men witnessed and participated in violence at a scale that peacetime officers simply never experience. Police documentation places them at over 2,000 riots and street confrontations during their combined service. This wasn't classroom instruction or theoretical exercise. Every technique they eventually taught had been tested against opponents who genuinely wanted them dead. Fairbairn published his combat methodology under the name Defendu in 1926, and his philosophy made no pretense at sporting behavior. His written guidance cut through any romantic notions about honorable combat with brutal directness. The only rule worth remembering was simple: survival. Everything else was negotiable. This mindset would prove essential when global conflict arrived again. When Britain found itself standing alone against Nazi Germany in 1940, Winston Churchill faced a strategic dilemma. Conventional military forces couldn't match German strength directly. The Wehrmacht had demonstrated overwhelming superiority in combined arms warfare across Poland, France, and the Low Countries. Britain needed asymmetric options. Churchill wanted raiders, men who could strike from shadows, eliminate key targets, destroy infrastructure, and disappear before the enemy could respond. The regular army trained soldiers for conventional battle, bayonet charges, rifle formations, disciplined advance under fire. None of that prepared men for slipping into enemy camps at midnight and cutting throats. Churchill needed killers, and 2 elderly policemen from Shanghai knew exactly how to create them. In July 1940, Fairbairn and Sykes received military commissions despite their advanced ages of 55 and 57 respectively. They arrived at a remote Scottish estate that would become legendary in special operations history and immediately began transferring decades of Shanghai street wisdom into formal training programs. But they lacked one essential element: a purpose-built murder weapon.
Existing military knives have been designed for different purposes entirely. Trench knives from the previous war prioritized brawling capability, brass knuckles integrated into handles for close-quarters chaos in muddy trenches. Utility knives needed to cut rope, open crates, prepare food. Nothing in military inventory existed purely for silent assassination.
On November 4th, 1940, both men walked into Wilkinson Sword's London offices to remedy this deficiency. The meeting with company leadership and their chief engineer produced one of history's most consequential weapons development conversations. Fairbairn's specifications revealed exactly what decades of knife combat had taught him. The blade required exceptional penetrating capability, thin enough to slip between ribs without resistance. It needed to defeat heavy winter clothing, specifically Soviet-style greatcoats with their multiple layers of dense wool, since British commandos might operate anywhere from Norway to the Russian front. Double edges allowed cutting in any direction during chaotic struggle. Most critically, Fairbairn understood the difference between a wound and a kill. Torn blood vessels tend to constrict, slowing hemorrhage. Cleanly severed arteries cannot close themselves. A man whose carotid artery has been cut cleanly loses consciousness within seconds and dies shortly afterward. The blade must be sharp enough to achieve this distinction. When engineers asked about the extremely thin blade profile, Fairbairn provided chilling reasoning. Such wounds leave minimal external evidence. A tiny drop of blood, easily missed by anyone discovering the body. Wilkinson delivered 50 prototypes in January 1941. The design was pure assassination tool. Roughly 6.5 inches of double-edged blade. Overall length just under 12 inches. Early versions featured brass handles with knurled grip texture. Fairbairn insisted on bright polished finish, arguing that a gleaming blade created psychological impact on anyone facing it. Initial production remained modest. Fewer than 7,000 first pattern knives left Wilkinson's factory. But as commando operations expanded and results proved the weapon's effectiveness, demand exploded. Production specifications evolved through multiple patterns to save strategic materials. Eventually, over 100 manufacturers joined the effort. By war's end, nearly 2 million of these blades had been produced. Training centres spread across Britain and Canada, but the Scottish Highlands facility known as Achnacarry became most infamous. Over 25,000 men passed through its program between 1942 and 1946. Fairbairn acquired a nickname that captured his instruction style perfectly: Dangerous Dan. Training used live ammunition. Some men died during exercises. Many survivors later claimed they preferred actual combat to the preparation. Sykes formalized specific curriculum for blade work in mid-1942. Official documentation made no effort at euphemism. The course taught men to fight and kill without firearms, since knife work dominated the syllabus. Calling it close combat seemed inadequate. Silent killing described the actual purpose more accurately. Fairbairn developed detailed targeting guides, listing specific anatomical targets with expected results. The subclavian artery brought unconsciousness within seconds, death shortly after. The carotid worked nearly as quickly. Arm arteries took longer but remained reliably lethal. Heart strikes produced immediate effect. These timelines were optimistic under actual combat conditions, but they gave commandos specific objectives during the chaos of close-quarters fighting. The signature technique, designated Hold 13 in Fairbairn's published manual, detailed sentry elimination with surgical precision. Approach from behind. Strike the throat with the forearm while simultaneously hitting the lower back. The victim reflexively gasps, allowing the attacker to cover mouth and nose completely. Screaming becomes impossible. Then the blade finishes the work. What happened on October 3rd, 1942, changed the entire strategic calculation. A small commando team landed on Sark, a tiny island in the occupied Channel Islands. During the operation, a Danish commando named Anders Lassen eliminated a German sentry using his fighting knife. The extraction went badly. Bound prisoners attempted escape during withdrawal, and several died in the resulting struggle. When reports reached Berlin, Hitler's response was disproportionate by any rational measure. On October 18th, he issued one of the war's most notorious directives. The order mandated immediate execution for all captured commandos regardless of uniform, surrender status, or conventional prisoner rights. It violated international law explicitly and would later serve as evidence at war crimes tribunals. But beyond the legal implications, the order revealed something profound. British commandos had achieved psychological effects far exceeding their actual numbers. German military leadership was genuinely frightened. Documentation confirms the operational impact. Norway received 30,000 additional garrison troops following a single raid. The tiny island of Sark got more than 13,000 mines laid across its modest territory after Operation Basalt. Commanders perceived as insufficiently vigilant faced replacement. Coastal defences across occupied Europe were strengthened dramatically. The German military produced and distributed counter-training materials specifically addressing British silent killing methods, and sentries stopped standing watch alone. The Fairbairn-Sykes blade was not without genuine limitations. The extremely thin blade tips proved vulnerable to breaking when striking bone. The round handle made orientation difficult in total darkness. The weapon served absolutely no utility purpose beyond killing humans. Alternative designs addressed these shortcomings. The American car-bar provided better utility with its single-edged blade and stacked leather handle that maintained grip when soaked in blood or water. German infantry carried their own fighting knives with wooden handles and versatile blade geometry useful for routine tasks beyond combat. One Special Forces veteran, with experience across multiple national militaries, complained directly about the original design. The blade tip fractured against bone. The handle seemed designed for surgical precision rather than desperate struggle. Later iterations incorporated lessons learned. Oval handle cross-sections replaced the original round profile for better indexing. Blade thickness increased for durability. But these technical improvements never achieved the iconic status of the original. The reason was simple. No improved design carried the mystique of the men who created the first version and the operations they enabled. A solid gold Fairbairn-Sykes fighting knife rests within the Commando Memorial at Westminster Abbey. The blade's silhouette appears in military insignia across multiple nations: British Royal Marines, Belgian Commandos, Dutch Special Operations, Australian Commando regiments, and American Rangers, among others. Production continues today. Sheffield manufacturers still make the blades to government specifications established in 1949. Sterile versions without identifying marks are produced for sensitive NATO operations. Nations continue ordering the design 8 decades after its creation. In December 2019, reports emerged of a special boat service operator employing his fighting knife during an ambush in Afghanistan when his firearm was disabled. If accurate, it marked the first confirmed kill with this blade in nearly 50 years. Fairbairn died peacefully in 1960 at age 75. Sykes had passed in May 1945 as the war concluded. Their partnership had fractured years earlier when Sykes reported Fairbairn's intention to join an actual commando operation, fearing that his capture would compromise too many training secrets. But the blade they designed together outlived both men by generations. It remains in operational service 84 years after production began, teaching the same fundamental lesson that Fairbairn learned bleeding on Shanghai cobblestones in When darkness falls and distance closes, the man with the better blade and the resolve to use it will survive. The other man will not. Two scarred veterans of Shanghai's underworld, well past their physical prime, taught thousands of young commandos how to kill silently using techniques proven across hundreds of desperate street fights. The knife they designed so terrified German soldiers that commanders struggled to find men willing to stand guard alone. That documented legacy requires no embellishment. What makes the production story remarkable extends beyond mere numbers. When Wilkinson's sword received initial orders, they possessed the expertise but lacked the capacity. Demand from commando units, SOE operatives, and eventually American OSS agents overwhelmed any single manufacturer's capability. British industrial coordination transformed the challenge into an assembly line triumph. Over 100 separate factories eventually contributed to production. Some manufactured only blades, others produced handles exclusively. Final assembly occurred at designated facilities, where quality control ensured each weapon met exacting standards. The manufacturing evolution told its own story of wartime necessity. First pattern knives featured solid brass handles, beautifully crafted but consuming strategic materials needed elsewhere. Second pattern versions introduced hollow cast brass, maintaining appearance while reducing material requirements. By the third pattern in late 1943, zinc alloy replaced brass entirely. Handle rings increased from smooth surfaces to 27 distinctive grooves, providing grip security even when slicked with blood. Each modification represented lessons learned from actual combat employment. Commandos returning from operations provided feedback that engineers incorporated into subsequent production runs. The blade evolved alongside the men wielding it. Veterans who employed these blades rarely discussed their experiences publicly. The psychological weight of knife combat differed fundamentally from killing at distance. A rifle or artillery piece placed mechanical and spatial barriers between killer and killed. The fighting knife eliminated all separation. One British commando described the aftermath of house-to-house fighting in occupied Europe with haunting simplicity. Entering a darkened room, he sensed movement behind a door. When it cracked open, he reacted without conscious thought. The blade found its target, but then his hand refused to withdraw the weapon. His body had executed the technique perfectly. His mind struggled to process what his hands had accomplished. Such accounts remained rare in official records. After-action reports from special operations typically focused on objectives achieved, intelligence gathered and extraction completed. The intimate violence enabling those successes went largely undocumented. Norwegian resistance fighters who trained under British instructors brought these techniques home to occupied Scandinavia. French Maquis guerrillas received abbreviated versions of the curriculum. Greek partisans, Yugoslav fighters, and resistance cells across Europe learned variations adapted for their specific circumstances. The knowledge spread like ripples from a stone dropped in water. Two men's expertise accumulate across decades in Shanghai, dispersed across an entire continent of underground warfare. German military documentation reveals the psychological toll exacted by commando operations. Garrison duty along coastal installations became deeply unpopular assignments. Soldiers who had demonstrated courage under conventional combat conditions requested transfers rather than face nights wondering whether death would arrive silently from the shadows. The counter-training manual distributed in 1942 acknowledged the threat explicitly. Titled Defense Against British Gangster Methods, it attempted to prepare German soldiers for attack techniques they had never previously encountered. The document's existence confirmed that Wehrmacht leadership recognized a genuine tactical problem requiring institutional response. Defensive measures multiplied. Guard dogs became standard at sensitive installations. Illumination increased along perimeters. Patrol patterns grew unpredictable. Watch schedules shortened to maintain alertness, and the two-man sentry policy spread across occupied territories. None of these countermeasures eliminated the threat. They merely complicated commando operations slightly, while consuming German resources that might otherwise have supported offensive action elsewhere. Every subsequent generation of special operations blade design acknowledged what Fairbairn-Sykes accomplished. The Gerber Mark II, which achieved iconic status during Vietnam, addressed the original's weaknesses while preserving its essential philosophy. Thicker blade stock resisted breaking, modified handle geometry, improved grip indexing. But the fundamental concept remained unchanged. A weapon optimized for ending human life at intimate distance. Modern tactical knives from dozens of manufacturers trace their conceptual lineage directly to that 1940 meeting at Wilkinson's Sword. The entire category of purpose-built fighting knives exists because two policemen from Shanghai understood exactly what such weapons required and possessed the credibility to demand those specifications be met. Military training establishments worldwide still teach techniques derived from Fairbairn's curriculum. The specific holds may have evolved. Modern understanding of anatomy has refined targeting guidance, but the underlying philosophy remains intact. When all other options fail, when firearms malfunction or ammunition exhausts or silence becomes essential, the blade remains. That continuity spans 8 decades of technological revolution. Guided missiles, night vision, satellite communications, and precision munitions have transformed warfare beyond recognition. Yet special operations units still carry fighting knives and still train their employment using methods that would have been recognizable to commandos preparing for raids in night. Some tools prove so perfectly suited to their purpose that improvement becomes nearly impossible. The Fairbairn-Sykes fighting knife achieved that rare status, not through accident, but through design informed by more real-world violence than any committee or laboratory could ever replicate. The blade that made German sentries sleep in pairs earned its reputation one silent kill at a time.